Now, the pictures of celebrated portrait photographer Harry Borden often grace the covers of leading magazines such as Time and Vogue, but for the past 5 years he's been working on a starkly different project, meeting and photographing survivors of the Holocaust.
These images feature in an amazing new book called Survivor, and Harry Borden joins us now in the studio. Harry, good morning and welcome to News Breakfast. This really is an extraordinary document, an important piece of history, but remarkable photographs as well. How did this idea come to you?
It was a combination of two things, really. To start with, it was an obvious kind of attempt to do something historically important and profound. You know, I got to the point in my life, you know, as you do when you're in middle age, 40. You know, I'd spent 20 years photographing the great and good. In fact, I photographed Michael Hutchinson, the pictures in the National Portrait Gallery in Canberra. And I kind of am very proud of those pictures, but I wanted to do something that would have a lasting sort of impact. And then secondly, my father's Jewish. He is an unusual chap. You know, his parents came to America as economic migrants, and he joined the American Marines to fight Hitler. Then he went into advertising. He was one of the original madmen, you know, worked in Madison Avenue. And then he probably had a midlife crisis and moved down, after moving to London, he moved down to the southwest, to Devon in the West Country, and bought a pig farm of all things. And so I kind of grew up from the age of about 6 or 7 in not meeting any Jewish people. My dad's an atheist, not interested. So in part, it was also an exploration of my identity, really.
He said something to you about the Jewish faith when you were young that's stayed with you.
Oh, absolutely. That was a very kind of jarring and profoundly disturbing kind of revelation, really. You know, you kind of you trundle along. You know, you kind of think that your father is heroic. You admire your father, and then, you know, my dad sort of told me that actually there was a time when he would have been killed because of his, and I would have been killed, and so that's very disturbing. The idea that he was kind of less than you know, other men, less than human, you know.
So you then set about to, I guess, identify and find these people, these survivors of the Holocaust, hear their stories, which is just a pen portrait, really, that they write themselves, in addition to the biographical information you have in here. Was it difficult to locate them, and was it difficult to encourage them to be photographed?
I basically wanted to have a sort of self-selecting mechanism. So I initially did a talk at a place called the London Jewish Cultural Centre, which has sort of organises for survivors to go into schools and talk about their experiences. And I kind of leveraged my celebrities. So, you know, I showed all these pictures of famous people, and I think probably a few of them were happy to be photographed by the same person who photographed Baroness Thatcher or whatever. And once I had a few people, then I wanted it to be international. So I gave a talk to the Australian Jewish News. I didn't give a talk, I gave an interview, you know, over the phone, and as it was back then, because this was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I came to Melbourne and did a significant number of people in Melbourne. Then Israel. Someone else came on board, a granddaughter of survivors, someone who's helped me greatly, called Miriam Hechtman. And she sort of helped me logistically then go to Israel, and then we finished off in New York. But each time we did an interview, and we had people coming to us, and so they were keen to be involved, you know.
Complementing the photographs are just sometimes 1 or 2 words, but sometimes a little more little letters and messages from your subjects, which I think really adds to it.
Yeah, the idea behind that, I mean, I chose to photograph them in a way that was very different to the way I would photograph celebrities. So I didn't use any lighting, I just used available light, just turned up with a tripod, no assistance.
And they're in their domestic settings as well, which is interesting.
So each portrait is a record of the relationship I had with the person on the day.
Yeah.
And I was also keen, for me it's about intimacy, and the words that you pick up on, they are unique and different in each case, and so they further personalise the portraits.
They really are different. I mean, some of the reflections are bitterly sorrowful, as you might imagine. Some are angry, some are defiant, some are full of optimism and hope. So you must have found then that these survivors were, as we all are as human beings, notwithstanding the similarity of their experience, all very different people.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I kind of hoped to achieve in a way. I mean, I think quite often Holocaust survivors are portrayed in quite a cliched way,
Yes.
as kind of uniquely heroic or
Yep.
or victims of a uniquely horrific event. And I wanted to emphasise everyone's individuality.
And they
really.
say that themselves. There's a couple of the survivors photographed in this book say, well, we were no better at surviving, we were no more heroic than anyone else. We just managed to survive somehow. And I think that's some of the most poignant stories in there. Just amazing stuff.
And how many of the people that you photographed have died since?
Yeah, that was a sobering realisation, was when I had a publisher, and they did a fantastic job actually, the reproduction's great, but they were very insistent, and I was glad they were, that we had a biographical element to it. So the back third of the book is sort of historically fact-checked. They got a Holocaust historian to go over the biographies. And I also wanted everybody in the book to get a copy of the book, and I also wanted them to be happy that they would be part of this. And so I contacted them, and yeah, I would say probably 30 to 40% of the people that I started photographing have passed, sadly.
Has the experience of documenting these people and taking their photograph, has that changed the way you photograph the bold and the beautiful now?
Yes, probably. I mean, it's kind of with something that's purely in the photographic world. But I joined an agency, you know, sort of I think probably in early noughties, that had a lot of great documentary photographers, and I probably got influenced by them as well. But it's partly, I mean, it's also when you're waiting to photograph, you know, some famous person, it's quite stressful. So it's nice to sort of, as well as the kind of well-lit, kind of polished portrait, to sort of pick up a Leica or a documentary camera and it's quite often, you know, the interesting pictures of the Beatles are the pictures backstage with Brian Epstein. They're not the album covers or the posters that were made at the time.
An experience like this must make you a lot less tolerant of the fuss and nonsense that goes with the celebrity life, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, it gives you a sense of... Well, but personally, you know, in the course of making the book, you know, you have the trials and tribulations of your life, and you know, it just gave me a sense of perspective as well, listening to the stories that they told.
Sure.
And yeah.
It's a beautiful volume. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Oh, well,
a
thank
lasting
you.
document.
Cheers.
Thanks, Harry. Take care.
Thanks.